Welcome everybody. This is Simon Turpin of Answers in Genesis UK, and tonight I have with me a very special guest joining us all the way from Tennessee in the United States. So some of our American viewers will obviously maybe be familiar with our guest. He is Dr. Calvin Beisner, and he is the founder and spokesperson for Cornwall Alliance, the Stewardship for Creation. So tonight we're going to be looking at some interesting topics to do with climate change, the biblical mandate in Genesis 1:28, and things like COVID-19 and what that has to do with climate change. So let me just say, first of all, thank you, Dr. Beisner, for joining us.
Absolutely. I'm glad to be with you again.
Yeah, we had you in the UK with us maybe 2 or 3 years ago now, and it was a very interesting evening that we had with you. So
just about 3 years ago, yes, 3.5.
Yeah, we'll have to have you back again, hopefully sometime in the future.
Well, I'd love to come. I have a daughter and her husband and 2 grandchildren there, so I have extra motives.
Yeah, good reasons to come. Yeah, but so as I said, tonight we're going to look at a few interesting topics. But could you begin for maybe telling some of our viewers about your ministry and the purpose of Cornwall Alliance?
Sure. Well, the Cornwall Alliance, one way to put it is that we're trying to save the planet from the people who are trying to save the planet. We try to bring a thoroughly biblical Christian worldview to questions related to environmental stewardship and economic development for the poor, and at the same time to tie those things together with the gospel and with biblical instruction as to how we should live, what our Christian conduct should be. So what we do is we try to educate the public and policymakers on 3 things simultaneously, tied together, interwoven, okay? The first is what we call biblical earth stewardship, what we can also call godly dominion. This is rooted in Genesis 1:28, where having created Adam and Eve in his own image, God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and everything that moves on the face of the earth. And this dominion, some people, some non-Christians have accused Christians of thinking, well, this gives us license to just rape and pillage the planet, to abuse it, rather than to use it in a wise way. That certainly isn't the case. We should learn about what our dominion should be like by reflecting on God's dominion. Since He made us in His image, if we're going to exercise dominion, we should reflect His. And we learn about that in earlier verses of Genesis 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So He went from nothing to everything. And the better we get at making more and more with less and less, the better we reflect the image of God in that respect. God brought order out of chaos. He brought light out of darkness. He brought life out of non-life. He brought great abundance of life. And so those are the kinds of things that should reflect in our own dominion. So we really try to summarize godly dominion over the earth this way. It means men and women created in God's image, laboring lovingly together to enhance the fruitfulness, the beauty, and the safety of the earth, to the glory of God and the benefit of our neighbors, so that we're really addressing the 2 great commandments, to love God and to love neighbor. So that's the first area we really work on. The second is economic development for the poor around the world. And we believe, both on the basis of biblical revelation and on the basis of the study of economic history, that this depends on 2 things. The first is a set of social institutions, 5 social institutions: private property rights, entrepreneurship, free trade, limited government, and the rule of law. The second is access to abundant, affordable, reliable energy, because everything that we do requires energy, and so the more energy that we can focus and use, the better we can do at making food, clothing, shelter, medicine, transportation, everything else that we depend on for health and long life. And so we put those two together, and that's what's necessary to see whole societies rise and stay out of society. None has ever done so without those, and none will ever stay out of poverty for long without those. And then finally, of course, as I said a little while ago, the gospel of Christ. People are not going to use God's world the way God intends for them to use God's world, as long as they are in rebellion against him, as long as they do not understand his world the way he has made it. We believe that God, an infinitely wise designer, an infinitely powerful creator, an infinitely faithful sustainer, has made this world to be understood and used by people made in his image. But as long as we remain slaves of sin, as Paul describes us in Romans chapter 6, we are not going to understand the world the way he's made it. We're not going to use it the way he intends for us to. And so it's crucially important, both for our godly dominion over the earth and for lifting and keeping societies out of poverty, that we share the gospel, that we see many more people come to know Christ. So those are the things that we're committed to. We're a network of just under 70 different scholars. Roughly a third are natural scientists, including, by the way, some of the world's top climate scientists. Roughly a third are economists and policy wonks, and roughly a third are theologians, pastors, ethicists, philosophers. And I get to have fun interacting with all of those different scholars and trying to pass on their insights to others.
Yeah, great. And so if you're not familiar with the Cornwall Alliance, I do recommend you go to the website and get familiar with all that's on there, because it's a really helpful website to help us as Christians understand the issues of our time. Because those 5 things that you mentioned, Dr. Beisner, I think we see those being attacked in the Western world that we live in today. Those freedoms are being taken away.
We do, definitely. That's one of my great concerns right now during this time of response to the coronavirus, COVID-19. And I recognize that very, very serious efforts need to be undertaken to curb the spread of this virus. It's a very serious matter. But I think some of those things are seriously undermining the liberties that at least people in the Anglo-Saxon world, the world that's been shaped so much by the whole history of English common law, of American constitutional government, and so on, we're seeing very serious encroachments on people's liberties. And so I think we need to do our very best to curb the spread of this virus. Although ultimately I think we're going to need either vaccine or herd immunity before we completely stop the spread. But at the same time, we need to be trying to preserve rights regarding private property, limited government, the rule of law, freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, freedom of worship, and all of those things. By the way, I might also quickly mention there is another organization called Cornwall Alliance. Ours is specifically Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation. But there's an organization there in England called the Cornwall Alliance that is related to your area of Cornwall. Okay. So your listeners might especially want to know, we are at cornwallalliance.org. That's cornwallalliance.org.
Yeah, you don't want to go to the one in the UK. Go to go to Dr. Beisner's one. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for pointing that out. So I guess for many of us in the Western world, especially whether you're in the US or the UK, we see a lot of political or just activism on climate change today, whether it be Greta Thunberg or here in the UK. I talked about this earlier. Extinction Rebellion. Is what they're trying to do credible science, or is there a political ideology behind this?
Well, one might ask, would you prefer meat or potatoes for dinner tonight? And the answer is Yes, both. It's not an either or situation. There's some credible science going on, and there's some very sloppy science going on. There's a lot of political activism and a lot of political agenda being pursued, and there is also a lot of sincerity. It's all over the spectrum, and I think that we don't do well to overgeneralize. But there are things that are hopelessly oversimplified. Just today, results came out from a new poll done by Lifeway Research, which is an organization related to the Southern Baptist Convention here in the United States. A poll done of pastors in America, Protestant pastors, that shows that a higher percentage now believe that global warming is real and humanity is the cause. People are causing it. When one looks at that poll, one thinks, well, gee, how would I answer that? Do you believe that global warming is real and that people are causing it? Now, I'm one of the leading skeptics about global warming in the world, but I would say yes in answer to that question. Because I do believe that global warming is real. I also believe that global cooling is real. They go cyclically and have occurred all through geologic history. I think that we're probably still in a warming trend, although it's really difficult to say that at any given time because trends can turn. We don't know just when they do that. But I think we probably are still in one. And I also think that human activity contributes to that. Since, say, the 1960s, maybe even has contributed more than half of the warming that we've been able to observe. The really crucial question is not, do you think it's real or do you think people contribute? The crucial questions are things like, how much do people contribute? How much warming comes from the carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases that we add to the atmosphere? What are the benefits and the harms of any of that? And what are the benefits and the harms of the activity that we do that is responsible for adding that carbon dioxide to the atmosphere? And for that matter, what are the benefits of the added carbon dioxide to the atmosphere? All of those are questions that tend to get just shoved aside by most of the global warming or climate change activists. There are plenty of scientists who address those questions very carefully, and they have opinions all over the scale again. But I think that as Christians, we need to do what the Apostle Paul tells us to do in 1 Thessalonians 5:21. He says, test all things, hold fast what is good. And so that's what we try to do with the Cornwall Alliance. And our answers to those questions would be roughly this. Yeah, global warming is real. Human activity contributes to it. We think that the actual warming effect of added carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is quite small, much smaller than what the climate models, the computerized climate models, would predict. And the reason we think that is that observation is very different from the predictions of the models. On average, the models predict 2 to 4 times as much warming as actually observed over the relevant period. And that's despite the fact that the models put all of the warming down to added CO2 in the atmosphere rather than only a portion of it. Well, we can't know that all of it comes from that because we know that the warming has happened in the past without it. So we know that the models exaggerate CO2's warming effect. We think that in fact, for every doubling of CO2 in the atmosphere, which still hasn't happened, by comparison with pre-industrial times, we might reach double by around the end of this century. But for every doubling of CO2 content in the atmosphere, we think that the increase in global average temperature is more likely to be somewhere in the range of 1/4 to 1/2 degree Celsius, rather than in the range of 3 degrees, 2.5 to 4.5 degrees Celsius, which is the typical figure generated by the models. And then we also think that the warming is mostly beneficial even according to the models and to all greenhouse theory, greenhouse warming happens primarily toward the poles, primarily in winter, primarily at night. So in other words, cold temperatures are lifted. Hot temperatures are essentially unaffected. You don't get increasing heat toward the equator. You get increasing warmth toward the poles. The result of that is that land that can be cultivated expands toward the poles, whereas you don't lose land toward the equator. It expands toward higher altitudes as well as higher latitudes. Meanwhile, also, since cold snaps kill about 10 times as many people per day as heat waves do, you're going to have fewer cold snaps, but not added heat waves. So you're going to have declining deaths related to temperature. And then in addition, the added CO2 helps all plants to grow better. For every doubling of CO2 concentration in the atmosphere, you get an average 35% increase in plant growth efficiency. They grow better in warmer and cooler temperatures and wetter and drier soils, and they make better use of soil nutrients. Again, that expands the range where plants can grow. They also make better, they improve their resistance to disease and pests, and they improve their fruit to fiber ratio. The result is more food for everything that eats plants and everything that eats something that eats plants. And who benefits the most from that? Well, it's the poor. It's the people who need food to be at as low prices as possible. So all of this indicates that the benefits of CO2 in the atmosphere surely outweigh the harms. And then finally, we can look at what do we get from the activity that puts the CO2 into the atmosphere. Well, it's primarily generating electricity from coal and natural gas and oil. Well, what do we do with that electricity? What don't we do with it? We light our homes, we heat and cool our homes, we refrigerate our food and our medicines to stop food spoilage and medicines from going bad. We transport, we communicate, we do the very thing that we're doing right now here on this. I mean, electricity and so many other things that we do with energy. We produce food, clothing, shelter, and everything else. All of those things are crucial to human life. And before we had those things in the way we do now, before the Industrial Revolution, average life expectancy at birth was about 27 to 28 years. Today, around the world, it's about 70 years. In highly developed countries, it's nearly 80. In developing countries, it's 65. So we owe that to the fact that we have abundant, affordable, reliable energy, especially electricity from fossil fuels. And the idea that we're going to somehow curb global warming by switching from fossil fuels to wind and solar, I think is the idea that we're going to push societies back into poverty and more disease, more premature death.
Yeah. I think I heard you respond to a similar question the last time you were in England, where you said to someone, I don't believe in conspiracy theories, I believe in the depravity of man. And
yes.
And that, I think that's important to understand. There's a difference in worldview when it comes to how Christians view the climate and how maybe secularists are viewing it. Can you explain maybe the sort of naturalistic, or would you even say there's a pantheistic worldview behind much of what we see in the climate debate?
Yeah, well, a lot of the environmental movement is rooted in either a secular, atheistic, naturalistic worldview, or a pantheistic, that is, God is the universe, or a panentheistic, God is to the universe as the soul is to the body, or an animistic worldview. There are lots of gods and they inhabit rocks and trees and stones and things like that. Those two worldviews seem to be most widespread in the environmental movement outside of specifically Christian circles. Mm-hmm. And the secular one and the pantheistic one, frankly, wind up boiling down to about the same thing. Because if God is everything, well, then that's the same thing as if there's no God distinct from the universe, We've denied the creator-creature distinction, as Paul puts it in Romans chapter 1. If that's your worldview, then you're left thinking that the universe is basically the result of blind chance over time. And then it makes sense to think of the world as a very fragile place. So, for example, to take the question of how much warming comes from added CO2 in the atmosphere, I mentioned the idea of doubling the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere versus pre-industrial times when it was about 280 parts per million. Today it's about 415. We may reach the 560 doubling figure by the end of the century. People hear double and they think, wow, that's a whole lot of increase in CO2. But it's double of what?
Yeah.
Well, 280 parts per million is 28 thousandths of 1% of the atmosphere. 560 parts per million will be 56 thousandths of 1% of the atmosphere. Now, if you have a worldview that says the Earth is the result of blind chance over time, you can think of the climate system as very, very fragile, subject to being driven to catastrophic results by very minor fluctuations, subject to what we call positive feedback loops, where every feedback drives a given fluctuation farther in the same direction. That's the basic theory behind the global warming computer models that predict so much more warming than we've actually observed. If instead we think of the Earth as the product of an infinitely wise designer and an infinitely powerful creator and an infinitely faithful sustainer, and we look at what he says about his creation in Genesis 1, where over and over again, every day, he says he sees what he's done and it was good. And at the end of it all, he sees it all, having now added man to it, he says, and it was very good. Well, does it make sense to think that with that kind of design, the climate system would be so fragile that increasing CO2 from 28 thousandths of a percent to 56 thousandths of a percent of the atmosphere would bring catastrophe to the whole world? No, I don't think so. That would be like thinking that a brilliant architect designs a building so that if you lean on one wall, all the feedback mechanisms in its engineering structure multiply the strain of your weight until the whole building collapses. I don't think we'd think that that architect was very bright, and I don't think that you view the designer of fragile Earth as very bright either. But the fact is that natural science studies have shown us over and over and over again that negative feedback systems dominate nature. That is, if you bring some sort of a sudden impact onto a natural system, rather than the system multiplying that impact over and over again until the whole system collapses, the system instead diminishes that impact over and over again until it returns to something close to equilibrium.
Yeah. And you've touched on it a number of times already, Genesis 1:28. Now, often when I speak to other Christians about the fact that there is that dominion mandate in Scripture, and we are called to care for the planet God has given us, a lot of Christians sometimes I come in contact with will say, "Oh, that's just liberal theology," but it's not. It's rooted in Scripture, right? We're called to how as Christians can you give any practical advice for people who are out there that this is a commandment that's still for us today, and how to apply that?
Look, I have been for many, many years a member of the Evangelical Theological Society here in the United States. The ETS's doctrinal basis is the Bible alone, and the Bible in its entirety is the Word of God written and is therefore inerrant in its autographs. Now, I don't know any liberal Christian who would affirm that. And we are the people, evangelicals, who really take Scripture seriously. And when Genesis 1:28 says that God that God mandated that humankind should be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion over it, it is our obligation, our duty to God to understand what that requires of us and then to do that, right? So it's not liberalism at all. And when we recognize that the reason we mess up on that is our sin and our alienation from God, that's when, as evangelicals, we bring the evangel, the gospel in, and we say, look, this is how we reconcile people to God so that then they can begin to conduct their dominion in a truly God-honoring way, loving God and loving neighbor.
Yeah. There's also something else that we see there in the early chapter of Genesis, because God told Adam and Eve to be fruitful and multiply. And
Yes.
often you'll see in the media today, or the world's becoming overpopulated. Now, I think you're a father of, is it 7 children?
Yes.
Likewise, I fathered 7 children, and when people tend to look at you strangely if you're from a big family. I think one of the reasons today is because why would you have so many children in a world today? Should we fear overpopulation?
Well, let me get to the second question there. Should we fear overpopulation after answering the first one? Why would one have all those children? Well, first of all, they're all a wonderful blessing to us. We love them all and they love us, and that's just really neat. You know, as I said, I believe Scripture, and Psalm 127 says children are the fruit of the womb, children are a gift from the Lord, a heritage from the Lord, like arrows in the hand of a mighty man. So are children in the days of one's youth. Happy is the man whose quiver is full of them, right? The fruit of the womb is God's reward. So I've welcomed, my wife has welcomed all the children that the Lord would give us, and that turned out to be 7. They've all been a tremendous blessing to us. And so, you know, to us, it's a matter of trusting God. Are we going to say, well, God, you want to give us this gift, but we say no? Now, should we be afraid of overpopulation? You know, defining terms is a pretty important thing. One of my favorite Christian philosophers, Gordon H. Clark, wrote once, strict definitions and strict adherence to them are indispensable to intelligible communication. So we have to start off with a definition. What is overpopulation? Well, you would think that somehow or other it would be defined in demographic terms, that it would have something to do with population density, or with population growth rates, or maybe with age distribution within a population. But it turns out you can read all the stuff you want about overpopulation by all the people who warn that we are overpopulated. None of them defines overpopulation by any demographic criteria whatsoever. So, for instance, we get the strange notion that sub-Saharan Africa, whose population density is perhaps around 60 people per square mile, is overpopulated. But the Netherlands, with population density over 1,300 people per square mile, is not overpopulated. This is just insanity. It has nothing to do with demographic things. It has everything to do with poverty. And in some places, high population density and poverty are closely related. In other places, they are not. There's not a causal connection to them other than this. If population density is low enough, you don't have enough people around to cooperate much in building things, and so you can't create an awful lot of wealth. So low population density is more likely to lead to poverty than high population density. But instead of thinking that we should fear overpopulation, we should recognize that for every mouth born into the world, there are 2 hands, and more important than that, a mind. And God has made us in his image so that as we learn to use the skills he's given us and the resources out there that he's given to us, we are able to make more and more out of less and less. And the result is that we are not overpopulating. Now, what some people think of as overpopulation is, well, because there are more and more people, we're using up all the world's resources. We're going to run out of resources, oil or natural gas or food or whatever else. The answer to that comes from economics. Economists will tell you that price is a measure of scarcity. The higher a price is, the more scarce the priced object is. The lower the price, the less scarce. Well, for all extractive resources, that means things that we take out of the earth, whether minerals or plants or animals, those are extractive resources. For all extractive resources, the long-term price trend adjusted for inflation, and much more importantly, adjusted for the hours of work that it takes to buy them, right? The long-term price trend for every single extractive resource in the world is sharply downward, rapidly downward, and still falling. Now, what that tells us as thinking economically is that means all those resources are getting less scarce, not more scarce, over time. It would take too long to explain exactly why. People might read my book, Prospects for Growth, A Biblical View of Population Resources in the Future, to understand that. But that's the actual case. Oh, you have it right there. Yeah. There is, though, one resource that is becoming more scarce over time, not less. And that is people.
Yeah.
And what tells us that? It's that the price of people's labor is rising over time relative to all the other things. That means at the very same time that people are getting more in number, they're getting fewer in scarcity. That is, they're becoming more scarce, not less, over time. And that's because there is so much growing demand for people. The more people are able to do for each other, the more people want each other to do for each other.
Yeah.
So no, we should not be worried about overpopulation. We're not running out of resources. It's the exact opposite.
Yeah. So we can keep having children, being fruitful and multiply, and being blessed by the good gifts God gives us.
Yes. Now, one person, 40 years ago or so, did calculate that if we stayed at a certain population growth rate for, say, 1,000 years, humanity would begin to expand outward from the surface of the globe at the speed of light. Well, gee whiz, that's called straight line extrapolation, and it's just a logical fallacy, a mathematical fallacy. There are all kinds of things that affect how many children people choose to have over time. As a Christian, I welcome all the children the Lord will give to me. But other people make different choices. As it becomes increasingly expensive to raise children, people choose to have fewer children. But much more importantly than that, as the infant and child mortality rate declines, people say, well, I'd like to raise 5 children to adulthood. 300 years ago, if you wanted to raise 5 children to adulthood, you had to have 10.
Yeah.
Because roughly half would die before their 5th birthdays. And that affected everybody, wealthy and poor alike. Even Queen Anne of England, right? She had 19 children. Not one of them lived past age 11.
Yeah. Not
one of them became an adult. Yet she was probably the richest woman in the world at the time. So we should feel blessed that we're able to have so much healthier and longer lives at the very same time that there are so many more of us.
Yeah. If I could just ask you one more question, one final question. I know trying to alleviate poverty is behind a lot of the motivations of your ministry, but
yes.
And you may have heard this objection from Christians before. They'll often point to Jesus' words in the Gospels. I can't exactly remember where it is, where he says to the disciples, but the poor you will always have with you. Is that a text in its right context, or is it being taken out of context?
Yeah, you know, the Bible says Judas went and hanged himself. Go thou and do likewise, and what thou doest, do thou quickly. It says those three things in three different places, and if you pull them together that way, you have three texts out of context, right? The same thing is the case with this: the poor you will always have with you. We could also go from there to Deuteronomy chapter 15, which says that if indeed God's people were to obey His laws and to walk in His ways, there would be no poor among them. So what? Does Jesus contradict Deuteronomy? Does Deuteronomy contradict Jesus? No. These are conditional things, right? And Jesus' statement there was specifically to those who had objected to the ones who had condemned the woman who had used expensive ointment to anoint him and said, oh, this could have been used to take care of the poor, sell it and give the money to the poor. Jesus says, the poor you'll have with you always. That's not an absolute statement about all time in all societies forever. It's, look, you disciples, you can take care of that problem later. Right now, she's taking care of me. She's anointing me in preparation for my burial, right? Now, what are we supposed to do? In Galatians 2:10, the Apostle Paul said that the one thing that the other apostles in Jerusalem wanted to make sure he did was to remember the poor. He said, the very thing I was already intent on doing, right? So this should be our attitude. And what we want to do as a part of the work of the Cornwall Alliance is to help people see what are the things that do lift people out of poverty, and what are the things that trap them in it or push them back into it. And the things that trap them in it are such things as the denial of private property rights, the denial of free trade, the denial of or expansive government that tries to control all of life. I mean, if you want to look at the record of different countries in terms of rising and staying out of poverty, the socialist countries of the world, the more government-controlled economies have been terrible, have a terrible track record at lifting and keeping people out of poverty. It's the countries that respect those principles where poverty has been overcome. And frankly, praise God, that has been spreading around much of the world. In 1990, roughly 48% of the world's population lived in what the World Bank and the UN defined as severe poverty, on the equivalent of $1.90 US$1.90 per day per person of income. Today, that's down under 10%. Praise God for that.
Yeah, and so it should be our heart to take care of the poor, to look after the poor, and to care for God's people. So, well, thank you for your time tonight, Dr. Beisner. It's been great talking with you. Do you have any books that you would like to recommend quickly to people before anything you've got coming out or just come out?
Well, right now, through the end of April, the Cornwall Alliance is offering a free book called How Does the Creation Care Movement Threaten the Pro-Life Movement? And that might seem like a very strange thing to say. We probably can't give much time to it right now, but there is a very important way in which much of the creation care movement, by trying to portray the environmental policies it pursues as pro-life, when in fact they're not pro-life, really undermines the pro-life movement and divides the pro-life movement, and it makes it more difficult for the pro-life movement to forward its goals of bringing an end to abortion in the United States, in Great Britain, and elsewhere around the world. So the offer is this, that as our way of saying thank you for a donation of literally any size, no matter how small, okay? If a person will go to cornwallalliance.org, click on the donate button, make a donation of any size and ask for how does the creation care movement threaten the pro-life movement, or simply mention promo code 2004. That's 20 for 2020 and 04 for April, the fourth month of the year. Promo code 2004. We'll send a free copy of that book to them. All they need to do is just go make the donation and ask for it.
Yeah, great. So make sure you take up that offer and go to cornwallalliance.org and please do check out this vital ministry. So once again, Dr. Beisner, thank you for your time this evening.
Well, Simon, thank you very much for having me back on, and I hope that we'll be able to do this again sometime.
Yeah, great. Thank you.